Hello, 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 everybody. If we could get to our seats, I know you guys getting some coffee and food and snacks and visiting with the friends. That's what the conventions are all about. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I am Eugene Daniels. Can I just ask everyone to shh just a little bit? Thank you, guys. Thank you. I almost sang, and that would have been bad for everyone involved. For those that don't know, Quentin is the principal deputy campaign manager for first the Biden and now the Harris campaign. Before that, he was the campaign manager for Raphael Warnock's 2022 campaign in Georgia, and the deputy campaign manager for the 2018 gubernatorial for J.B. Pritzker here, and worked for Pritzker after. So far, so good. Fact checked right.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. This is obviously a different conversation and convention than we thought was happening just a few weeks ago. And I want to start there with President Biden and his decision to drop his bid for re-election. It's been less than a full month since that he came out and ruined all of our Saturdays, our Sundays. I was drinking a strawberry margarita in Minnesota. What was your initial reaction? Because you were one of the folks that were out front saying he is not dropping out, even that morning.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm fundamentally believe that, this race, and you work for people who embody what they talk about. And for our campaign, the whole ethos had always been around freedom, democracy, a fundamental choice about what was best for this country and the people living within this country. And so I had a little bit of a heads up in the fact that the president called several of us and told us his decision before he made it publicly with his letter. But for me in that moment, obviously, it's a little bit of sadness, but at the same time, this is somebody who was actually practicing what they preached and doing what they thought was best for the country. And so for me, it was really emboldened. It showed exactly who Joe Biden is. And again, the contrast that we have been talking about for months about the difference between him and Trump. And then from there, once he said, obviously he put his support behind the vice president, and our team got to work.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that the president kept saying was, when it looked like I was going to lose, he went to God Almighty. He said that no one could do it. And then eventually he got to, if it looks like I'm going to lose. Had you already made that determination that he was going to lose in November?
Well, look,
were you one of the people that told him?
No. Well, look, first of all, this will probably sound like a cocky statement coming from me, but, we would have went all the way and won this thing against Donald Trump. But I will say that, look, the president made the decision that he made. And then, as I said, our team fell in line and got to work to do what we needed to do to make sure that we were putting the vice president on the best ground to move forward, to take over the realm of this campaign. And that has been our goal ever since. Yeah.
The switch to Vice President Harris, I'm going to start with kind of like the electoral math and the map.
Yep.
It seems to have opened up a different path. When some senior advisors went to the senators for President Biden, kind of in those weeks before he dropped, they basically only talked about one path, which was basically the blue wall.
Yep.
And with Vice President Harris, you guys seem to be playing, and I was in Arizona with her recently, the Sun Belt states, back to Georgia, North Carolina. What paths have really opened up for you guys now without President Biden at the top?
Well, look, I think that it's not what paths have opened up and what paths have not. I think if you actually look at where we are in this race, it is because our campaign invested in all the states to keep all the pathways open. And so you don't capture the momentum with the top of the ticket change in the way that we have if you don't invest in states like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. And our campaign had been investing there. We had been putting staff on the ground there. We had been opening field offices there. And so our campaign really started out from having multiple pathways to get to 270. And that's what we're continuing to build off of, and we're continuing to invest and keep all those pathways open as much as possible.
But it feels like a different race, right? Like, I've been on the road with her. Some other folks that I work with have been on the road with her. It feels like a different race with her out there. The polling obviously is different. You're having helicopters come. It feels like a different race. Does it feel like a different race to you?
Look, I mean, there's absolutely momentum and enthusiasm out there. The vice president is her own candidate. She has her own vision for the country. She has a different way of doing things that she wants to make sure. And our campaign is making sure that we introduce her to voters. And we're seeing voters respond very well to that, both her and Governor Walz. We're making sure that this is a campaign where everybody sees themselves reflected in it. Our travel schedule has been robust. We've hit every single battleground state a couple of times in some instances, bus tours. So there's a lot of enthusiasm that took place over a very short amount of time. But we're going to continue to do that and talk to voters and keep building off of this momentum.
Yeah. Why do you think voters, Democrats, are so excited? Because they weren't before, right? We were talking with a lot of Democrats who, even before that debate, were it felt like they were just like slow walking to November. And now it feels like Democrats are excited and sprinting. Why? Why would the switch from Biden to Harris do that for the party?
Look, I think that people see themselves in Vice President Harris. She's obviously, and I don't think there's any secret, she's much younger than Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and she has a different feel. And I think that voters are responding to that because they see that. And she's out talking to them about the issues that matter most. And then that's also being reflected in the policy agenda that she's putting forward, that's basically common sense proposals that people have been asking for. And I think that voters are really resonating well with that.
Is this a different electorate for her? Like when you think about President Biden and the 2020, the folks that voted for him in 2020, who you guys seem to be going after, at one point it was like a lot of older people, but now you have younger people, black and brown people, more interested and excited than before. You guys are clearly going after them in different ways, right? Especially with, well, and I talked to Rob Flaherty tomorrow, but like the digital operation and how much of an influence, like how much you guys are focusing on young voters.
Yeah.
Is she going to get a different voting electorate than President Biden, and why?
Look, I think in order for a Democrat to win, the voting electorate would have had to look the same. I think obviously you have to fundamentally turn out the base voters. Obviously young voters are critical, and the vice president is seeing a lot of enthusiasm among young voters. Black voters also, very critical. Latino voters, AAPI, just who she is and her identity is obviously going to be just a baseline place to start from that. That creates some of that enthusiasm, but you've got to turn that out. And we have to make sure that we're turning this enthusiasm and momentum into actual votes. People can show up to all the events, but our campaign right now is focused on making sure that when people can start voting as early as sort of mid to late September in Pennsylvania, one of the most important states, we're turning them out to vote. And so for me, that's where our priority is. But I think that the map would have looked the same. The voting blocks would have looked the same, and she has to build off that coalition. And then the other piece to that was also there for President Biden as well, is these sort of moderate, independent, leaning Republican conservative voters who are there and voting for Democrats as they did for the first time in 2020. They stayed with Democrats in 2022, and we're seeing them also stick with Democrats in 2024 because of Donald Trump's extremism and because of what is happening on the Republican side of the aisle, and we're going to take advantage of that as well.
When in polling before President Biden dropped out, there was kind of, black voters even. There was polling that showed that Donald Trump was getting 20%. You guys would say he was getting nowhere near 20% of the actual vote. But was he doing something wrong when it came to black voters? Like, why are black voters all of a sudden much more interested, other than the fact that she's black?
Well, look, I think first of all, you have to put it into perspective. One, it was an earlier time frame, and our campaign was saying, first of all, let me clarify and set the record straight. Donald Trump was never getting 20% of the black vote. I will put my career on that.
Yeah. What do you think he will get?
If I have my way, less than 5. But we're going to continue to talk to and communicate with African American voters. But look, I think that the point is that those voters weren't paying attention, and I don't think that black voters were ever saying that they were going to vote for Donald Trump in that large of a margin. I think some African American voters were parking their vote in undecided. And I think that has been the biggest shift, and we have seen that consolidation back to the vice president. And again, I think it's because, one, we're getting later in the cycle. Those voters are tuning in and paying attention. And this momentum has obviously captured the attention of the nation, too. A lot happened in the time frame of a month and a half, and that gets people to tune in. Yeah. And in presidential campaigns, you really have very sort of set moments where people are going to tune in. You have debates. You have moments like that where people tune in, and then the coverage that comes out of it. Obviously, the assassination attempt on former President Trump. Then you have the RNC convention. Then you have the DNC convention. Have a top of the ticket change. You have a vice presidential nominee pick on both sides, and so that stuff creates interest in the political world that makes it a little bit easier for us to break through. Yeah. But we still have to do that on the ground with our paid organizing and the organizing programs that we're building. We have to do that on media as well, and that's why you see these investments that we're making. And so all of these things have to work together to build a cohesive campaign that's reaching voters where they are.
You head up the campaign's advertising, leading the paid media team. There are different audiences for different ads. A month ago, you didn't really have to focus on introducing your candidate, right? Like everyone knew who Joe Biden was. How do you balance the need to intro Vice President Harris to people who don't know her yet, explain who she is, while contrasting with Donald Trump? Because those seem like two different pathways for folks.
Well, look, I think first of all, again, that at the end of the day, the stakes of what this election is about is the same. On one side, we're fighting to lower costs protect freedoms. And on the other side, you have Donald Trump and J.D. Vance with an extreme Project 2025 agenda and plan that is going to hurt people if they get back into the White House. And so when it comes to sort of making sure that we introduce the vice president, it's important to do that in tandem when you're also talking about the future and talking about the plans. It's important that people know her record of fighting and delivering for them as a prosecutor, and the work that she did as a attorney general and as a DA, and then also as the vice president of the United States. And you have to do that to paint worldviews. The reason why the vice president cares about housing is because she grew up most of her life renting. She knows what it's like to rent until you can afford to buy. She understands these things. And on the other side, Donald Trump has never worked for any of that. And so you can do both at the same time. In fact,
more expensive.
Well, it's more expensive, but you can also do both at the same time in any type of creative spot. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. But we do have that burden, but that's also, it's a burden, but it's also a positive, because those values that we're introducing and talking to the American voters about when it comes to the vice president are the same reasons they should trust her and understand that the policy proposals that she's putting forth, you can believe her and know why she's putting those policy proposals forward, because she's lived that life.
The interesting thing about so I've covered Vice President Harris for 3.5 years, 4 years at this point, and watching how many people are getting excited about her, how Democrats are kind of coalescing around her. I think it's surprising for a lot of people who look at that first year, who look at her 2020 campaign and have different opinions, I'll say, than they do right now. What do you think it is about her? Did she change? Did she, as she would say, she didn't fall out of a coconut tree, but did something change? Her staff changed over, they started doing new things. Why do you guys feel like she's ready for this moment?
Well, look, I think that staff is reflective of the candidate, and so the change that people are seeing is the vice president. But what I would say is that the vice president has always been experienced. That's why President Biden picked her to be his running mate. He picked her because she's been experienced. She's been in the room. She's been in the situation room to make these decisions on a global stage that are going to impact the world, leading the domestic policies, creating 16 million jobs with President Biden. And so when it comes to what's changed, I think she is the top of the ticket, and she can go out and speak about what it is that she wants. And as we're introducing her, these stories give people and candidates energy out on the trail. She's seeing voters respond, and I think that is also a really big motivating factor in all of this too. But the vice president knows who she is. She's unenamored by anything except making sure that she is talking to voters and talking to them on her terms, not Donald Trump. We're not chasing Donald Trump. We're not trying to do anything or prove anything to anybody. We're talking to the American voters, and most importantly, she is talking to the American voters about who she is and the vision that she has for their future.
You guys don't have the benefit of time, right? I think we're 80 days or something.
78.
78.
Who's counting?
Exactly. But even before that, voters will start voting in some of these early voting states pretty soon. How does that feel like a good thing for you guys, that there's less chance for this to go off the rails, right? Things seem to be going well. Or is it, if something does go off the rails, you have less chance to fix it?
Well, look, I don't think that I don't view it in that way. I view it as sort of, I don't view it in that way. I really do view it in regards of a strategic lens and thinking through, okay, if we know that this particular group of people will vote first or votes early, how do we get in front of them as quickly as possible? And so I think you see those things reflected in the type of strategy, reflected in where the vice president is going, the things that she's doing. Obviously, some states, as we've talked about, all the battleground states are incredibly important, but we know when early vote starts for some people, and so I think you're going to see heavy presence in that. We know when there's later early voting periods that start, and so if anything for us on the campaign, it is how do we look at this in a strategic level to make sure that we're accomplishing all the things that we need to accomplish to put the vice president in front of people before they can start voting, and understanding those time frames. But we don't really look at it as sort of making mistakes and having time to fix them. Our goal right now is to aggressively introduce and define the vice president to the American people, while at the same time drawing a contrast to Donald Trump and the differences in between them and their visions for this country, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
And try to make no mistakes is probably
obviously you never try to make any mistakes, regardless of who your candidate is.
One thing that we've seen on the Republican side, and we've written about it in Playbook, a lot of folks have, is that Republicans and President Trump in general, specifically, have kind of struggled to figure out how to come at Vice President Harris. And what I found really interesting when he went on the NABJ stage and talked about her, whether she chose to be black or not, which she's black, so that's not true, but you guys didn't really engage in it. And I'm curious, it feels like a different strategy than even in 2016 when Trump would attack Hillary Clinton for being a woman. What's the strategy behind when he attacks her on who she is, being a black woman, brown woman, keeps talking about her looks? How are you guys, he said that I think he's prettier than her. How do you guys think about that? And why not engage on his terms on that?
Well, look, it goes back to what I said about not chasing Donald Trump and not being anything. The vice president knows who she is. We don't have to prove to anybody. She doesn't have to prove to anybody that she's more of X or Y than what anybody says. But the broader point of that is that if you're having that conversation, you're talking about what they want to talk about and not talking about what you want to talk about and your vision for the country. And so, again, the reason why Donald Trump and Republicans, extreme MAGA Republicans, do that is because they don't have any plans. They have no policy agenda other than Project 2025, which they're trying to run away from, and it's got their identity all over it. J.D. Vance literally wrote the foreword. So again, they have nothing to follow on, and so they fall back on trying to play identity politics, but we're going to continue to have the conversation that we want to have, and the vice president is going to continue to have the conversation that she wants to have with the American voters about what's at stake in this election and her vision for this country. And that's where our focus is.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the policy. We haven't seen a ton of policy yet. Is that coming? Right, we're at week 4 of Harris being at the top of the ticket. She did the economic speech. We've seen some stuff about immigration. But yeah, I've talked to voters who, even on the website, right, there's not like a policy section at this point. Is that coming?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I would say that we have rolled out some policies. She's rolled out her $25,000 for first-time homeowners, expanding the child tax credit, continuing to drive down the cost of prescription drugs, which you saw a little bit of, her and President Biden reveal that in Maryland. Recently, you've talked about going back to housing, building more affordable housing units, even on top of what President Biden has done. And so I think that she has rolled out policy, and I think any qualms with sort of what's on the website is just a matter of literally switching the top of it, taking it in a presidential campaign. But the vice president is there, and you're going to continue to see more policy proposals from her. But the important thing is that the vice president isn't just saying things to get votes. These policies are being developed based on her worldviews, her values, her vision set. And so it's really important to her that she gets it right. Not just say things that either you're not going to be able to accomplish or say things that you don't mean in order to chase votes. These policies really are important to the vice president, as our team is doing the due diligence under her leadership to make sure that we develop them in the vein of who she is, what she's hearing from voters out on the road, both her and Governor Walz, and the vision and the things that she wants to solve in this country.
Yeah. Some of the birdies told me for the campaign, you're handling a lot of the rural strategy, right?
Yep.
In the campaign for Warnock, something that you implemented is making sure that you guys run up the votes in places that Democrats don't typically go to, right?
Yep.
Places like Western Pennsylvania, Eastern North Carolina, so that you don't just have to deal with those big cities.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's not really something that Democrats typically think of.
Yeah, look, I think first of all, my justification for this is that it helps with the long-term trajectory for Democrats. Half of, my mom always says that half of life is just showing up.
Yeah.
But for Democrats, I think particularly in these rural counties and places like Beaver, rural counties in Georgia, you have to go. One, these people are first on the chopping block and the ones who will be hurt the most under policies like Project 2025 and Donald Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans. And if Democrats aren't showing up to talk to them about them, to communicate and educate them, they never know that. And so they're susceptible to it. And I'm not saying that in one cycle or even two that we're going to go from losing in places that we were losing 90-10 to 50-50. But I am saying that if you show up in these places, you can cut these margins to 70-30, 85-15, and in the grand scheme of things, that pays dividends. And then looking at it not just being about the top of the ticket with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, it has a lasting effect down ballot to help some of these races. You'd be surprised at how many down ballot races could be put in play when politicians like Kamala Harris, Governor Walz go to these places and talk to these voters and stand alongside Democrats who are in the trenches fighting on these dirt roads, walking these distances. It's not a high-rise building.
Right.
When you're talking about organizing in rural counties, You're talking about you got to get in a car and drive from A to B, not just go up an elevator floor. And so this is a big, big difference. And I think that if Democrats continue to do this, we will continue to see us making gains in these places where Democrats have not been competitive in the past. And I think that I like to say that we proved it for Raphael Warnock in Georgia, and so it's something that is near and dear to me specifically because I'm also from a rural community myself.
Right. A couple of states that I've talked about, North Carolina and Georgia, come to mind the most. Yep. When you talk to Democrats before, I don't know what to call it, pre-dropout and post-dropout, but before Biden dropped out, they weren't excited about Georgia or North Carolina. A lot of them had already written it off. North Carolina is also one of those states that every 4 years Democrats think they're going to win, but it hasn't happened since Obama. Why do those particular states feel different this time around to you? Or are they not different?
No, look, first of all, Georgia was won in 2020. We held on to it in 2022, and we had been making investments into both Georgia and North Carolina. Yeah. Obviously, we have to flip North Carolina. North Carolina voters have a lot at stake. They're voting for who's going to be their governor. And I think you see an extreme candidate in Mark Robinson that's saying very inflammatory things. And as a partner, your governor is very important. And so I think that we have to make sure that we're talking to those voters and they know that they're talking about who's going to run their state within the state and also who's going to be their president. And so that dynamic exists in North Carolina, and we're very bullish on it. We have to make investments there in order to put that state in play, and we have, which is why it is in play.
How big of a factor is Mark Robinson in North Carolina for you guys?
Look, I think that it's all in the same brand. This is Donald Trump's vision of politics. And these type of candidates like Mark Robinson emerge because of Donald Trump and the extremism. And so I think that is something that we're absolutely going to talk about. We're absolutely going to make sure that Republican or that North Carolina voters know that these are two Republicans that are cut from the same MAGA cloth. That Donald Trump and Mark Robinson are exactly the same. And I think that they will see that. And so, our vision for making sure that we win North Carolina obviously involves that, right? Like, I don't think that there's going to be a large margin of super split ticket voters in North Carolina, right? Yeah. So we're going to communicate and talk to those voters that are in that state, but we have to do it. About a quarter, 1/4 of those voters, going back to the rural part, 1/4 of African-American voters in North Carolina live in rural communities. Mm-hmm. You have to go there to win that state. Yeah. You have to drive up those numbers. And the same for Georgia. And North Carolina and Georgia are both two states that have the highest registration of African-American voters, Georgia being number one at like 29-30%, North Carolina hovering right under like 26-27%.
Yeah. Today, what do you believe is the largest margin you guys can win by?
I don't like to make predictions. Look, for me, we have to win the Electoral College. We have to get to 270. We have to get to 270 electoral votes. Yeah. And our path to do that, we are very clear on what that pathway is. We're very clear on the investments that we're making to make sure that everything we do, from our candidates' time to the spending that we're doing on this campaign to the staff apparatus that we're building on the ground, is driving directly into that strategy to keep all those options open. And we're going to continue to reinvest, continue to make sure that we're reevaluating weekly even to make sure that we're on course to do that. And today we are. And so I'm not worried about margins when it comes to the popular vote. I'm worried about the Electoral College. And right now we're on a path with multiple pathways to get to 270. But obviously we want to build on the success of 2020 where we won 302 electoral votes. And so that is our aim.
Yeah. I'm going to get in trouble with my producer Parker because we're running out of time. I have one more question for you. When you're thinking about all of the things that you see and all of the information you're hearing and all the concerns you're hearing from Democrats and donors, what's the thing that keeps you up at night?
Look, first of all, I think that there are forces out there that want to stop people from being able to express their right to vote. Mm-hmm. And there is a phase of this campaign where, in all campaigns, where once it gets to the end, you have to turn all of this sort of knowledge and defining of your candidate and enthusiasm and energy into hardcore votes, whether it be early through the mail-in ballots, whether it be getting people to the mailboxes to get it and people getting those things. So there's a lot of logistics that go into that. But we do know that Republicans are already sort of setting the stage to try to overthrow an election or say something was unfair. They're fiddling with election systems. And
You guys
so,
just hired a huge legal team.
yeah, we have a huge legal team that we've invested in that. We're partnering with local counsel on the ground, one, to sort of catch legislation before it becomes law so that we can fight it then rather than trying to duke it out in the courts later and asking judges for emergency junctions. But we have to fundamentally protect people's rights to vote and make sure that this election goes off smoothly on the process side. And so that's something that I'm keenly aware of. Our campaign's keenly aware of it. But we know that Republicans don't want people to express that right to vote. And so we're going to make sure, I was about to say fight like hell, but I'll leave that to Governor Whitmer. But we're going to make sure that we are doing everything possible to make sure that people can express their right to vote and that we win this election in November.
We're going to have to leave it there. I am going to toss it to my colleague, Callie Bowdy, who's going to have a conversation with one of our sponsors. Immediately after that, big names, Governors Kathy Hochul, Roy Cooper, later Senators Bernie Sanders and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is